When Evan Mercer's abandoned car was found at the forest's edge, investigators had no idea they were about to unravel Marcus Halden's carefully hidden operation. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. The town of Silverbrook sat quietly between long stretches of forest and calm rivers, the kind of place people described as peaceful without thinking twice. Everyone knew the routines of their neighbors, and nothing dramatic ever seemed to happen there. The local grocery store closed early, the community center held small events every weekend, and the streets were usually empty by 9 at night. It was the kind of environment where danger felt far away, something people heard about on the news but never expected to face themselves. That illusion of safety was shattered the morning Evan Mercer's empty car was discovered at the edge of a woodland access road. The vehicle sat perfectly parked, with every door locked and the keys left in the ignition, as if someone had stepped outside for only a moment and never returned. Evan was a familiar face in Silverbrook. He was a college student who lived with his aunt and spent most of his free time hiking the nearby trails. People knew him for his calm personality and his habit of carrying a notebook wherever he went. His disappearance caused immediate confusion. No one could think of a reason why he would abandon his car so far from town, especially without telling anyone. The police arrived quickly and began examining the surroundings. The morning fog had not yet lifted, making the entire area feel strangely frozen in time. Officers searched nearby paths, but found no footprints or broken branches to suggest Evan had gone deeper into the woods. Rumors spread fast. Some believed he might have left town on purpose. Others suggested he had been attacked by wildlife. A few whispered that he might have stumbled upon something or someone he wasn't supposed to see. However, these theories lacked evidence. Silverbrook had no history of violent crime, and the idea of a sinister event happening there felt almost unbelievable. Yet the car was impossible to ignore. It stood as a silent reminder that something was very wrong. Investigators looked for immediate clues. The interior of the car was clean, with no signs of a struggle. Evan's phone was missing, but his wallet remained in the center console, still containing cash. This detail unsettled detectives. If he had simply walked into the forest, he would not have left his identification behind. If someone had taken him, they had not bothered to steal anything valuable. Everything seemed intentional, almost staged. As officers questioned locals, they realized no one had seen Evan the previous evening. His aunt explained that he usually informed her before taking long hikes, but he had said nothing this time. That silence became the first sign that the situation was more complicated than it appeared. People began to feel uneasy, locking their doors earlier and keeping their children inside. The peaceful atmosphere Silverbrook relied on so heavily began to disappear. Despite the growing tension, only one fact was clear. Evan Mercer had vanished without explanation, leaving behind an untouched car and a mystery that felt too large for such a small, quiet town. The community braced itself, unaware that this single disappearance would lead investigators down a trail far darker than anyone imagined. Detectives moved deeper into Evan's life, searching for anything that could explain why he disappeared so suddenly. His home was small and neatly arranged, a place that reflected his quiet personality. Shelves filled with textbooks lined one wall, and a stack of hiking magazines sat beside his bed. Nothing looked disturbed. Nothing seemed out of place except for a single detail that immediately caught the investigators' attention. His hiking backpack, the one he always took on outdoor trips, was missing, yet all his other hiking equipment remained where it normally stayed. This inconsistency created an unsettling possibility. Evan had either planned the trip in a hurry or someone had taken him before he packed properly. Detectives continued examining the room, taking photographs and collecting anything that might be useful. The air inside felt strangely still, as though Evan had stepped out moments earlier. On his desk lay a notebook with a black cover, well worn from constant use. Most of its pages contained neat, organized notes about his classes and daily routines. But the last page was different. It held a single unfinished sentence written hastily, the handwriting uneven compared to his usual style. The ink was slightly smudged, as if he had written it in a rush and closed the book too quickly. Investigators stared at the incomplete line, unable to determine its meaning, but they agreed it was significant enough to keep as evidence. The more they explored, the more confusing the situation became. There was no sign of a struggle. Evan's clothes were folded neatly in his drawers, his phone charger remained plugged into the wall, and the bed was made. It looked like he had left with the intention of returning soon. That made the final unfinished sentence in his notebook feel even more chilling. Had he attempted to warn himself about something? Had he begun writing down a thought before being interrupted? Or had he realized something important too late? Detectives broadened their search by checking Evan's recent activities. They reviewed his school attendance, spoke with classmates, and verified his social connections. Everything pointed to an ordinary life with no apparent conflicts, no suspicious behavior from friends, and no recent stress that could explain such a mysterious disappearance. His professors described him as focused and dependable, never the type to disappear without explanation. His aunt said he had seemed normal the night before, studying like usual and preparing for a quiz he had later in the week. Despite extensive questioning, no one could recall anything unusual. But as investigators examined Evan's digital footprint, a clearer picture began to form. His browser history showed several recent visits to hiking communities and outdoor forums. One specific conversation thread stood out because it appeared active just hours before he vanished. The username he had interacted with belonged to someone anonymous and untraceable. Detectives could see the messages but not the sender's true identity. Still, the most unsettling piece of evidence remained the unfinished sentence on the last page of Evan's notebook. A single, broken line that hinted at fear, urgency, or discovery. Investigators couldn't interpret it yet, but they sensed that whatever Evan had started to write could have been the key to understanding everything. In the quiet of his room, that incomplete message carried the weight of something hidden, something dangerous, and something that would soon pull the investigation into far darker territory. Investigators turned their focus to Evan's online activity, hoping it would reveal what he had been planning before his disappearance. His laptop, undamaged and fully functional, became the next central piece of the investigation. Digital forensics specialists scanned through browsing records, account logins, and message histories. Most of it reflected Evan's typical interests: research for school assignments, hiking videos, gear reviews, and nature articles. But buried among these familiar patterns was a cluster of visits to a remote camping forum he had never used before. Each visit had occurred within the same 3-day window leading up to the night he vanished. The forum itself was small and somewhat outdated. The layout contained simple threads, users submitted trail recommendations, and occasional discussions about survival technique. It was the kind of place where only dedicated outdoor enthusiasts gathered, not a platform most casual hikers stumbled upon. Yet Evan had created an account there, and joined an active conversation with a user named Ridgewalker, someone who posted frequently but shared nothing about themselves. The username had no profile picture, no personal description, and no linked accounts. It was a blank identity, using strong privacy settings that made tracing it difficult. The messages between Evan and this mysterious user appeared casual at first. They discussed hiking routes, weather conditions, and a lesser-known trail several miles outside Silverbrook. But as investigators read deeper into the thread, they noticed that the conversation quickly shifted from general advice to planning a meetup. The details suggested Evan believed he was going to explore a new path with someone experienced. Ridgewalker's tone, though simple, carried an unusual certainty about the trail's safety and beauty. For someone who valued caution in the outdoors, Evan seemed unusually trusting in this exchange. Detectives followed up by searching the trail mentioned in the conversation. The area was dense with foliage and lacked any official markings. It wasn't part of Silverbrook's known recreational zones, nor was it maintained by park authorities. The path looked natural and untouched, making it easy for someone to vanish without being noticed. A search team combed through the area for hours, but no footprints, equipment, or clothing belonging to Evan were found. The ground showed signs of recent activity, but it was impossible to determine whether they belonged to Evan or other hikers. The more investigators examined the online interaction, the more it seemed that the trail had been chosen specifically to isolate someone. The anonymity of the forum allowed Ridgewalker to approach Evan without leaving personal information behind. Even the language used in the posts seemed designed to blend in with typical hiking discussions, giving the impression of a harmless exchange. Specialists attempted to trace the IP address connected to Ridgewalker's account, but they quickly hit a dead end. The user had routed every login through multiple privacy filters, including remote servers that masked their true location. This level of concealment was far beyond what an ordinary hiker would use. It suggested planning, knowledge, and intention. The mystery deepened as investigators compared Evan's case with other disappearances from nearby regions. Subtle patterns began to emerge. Each victim had interacted online with an unknown user shortly before they vanished. At that moment, detectives realized Evan had not simply chosen the wrong hiking partner. He had crossed paths with someone who operated carefully, silently, and with purpose, leaving no trace except for the digital footprints investigators were only beginning to uncover. As investigators continued to examine Evan's digital activity, they expanded their search across state databases, hoping to find similar patterns in other missing person cases. What began as a routine check quickly turned into something far more disturbing. Two other individuals, both hikers, both outdoor enthusiasts, had disappeared in different states under circumstances eerily similar to Evan's. At first the cases seemed unrelated because they were filed months apart and in distant regions, but small details began aligning in ways that could not be ignored. Each missing person had participated in online communities focused on nature and remote trail exploration. Their messages showed the same pattern. Someone anonymous had approached them, suggested a trail few people knew about, and encouraged a meetup. The usernames involved in those older cases were different, but they shared the same traits: no profile picture, no personal details, and privacy settings strong enough to block any identity tracing. The writing style was also consistent, using short sentences and a calm, confident tone. These elements created a chilling realization that one person could have been behind all three vanishings. Detectives revisited the files from the older cases. In one, a man named Jordan Reeves had disappeared during a solo camping trip in Colorado. He had been active on a minimalist hiking forum where he exchanged posts with a user offering advice on navigating unmarked trails. In another case, a woman named Lila Avery vanished after meeting with an online contact who promised to show her a hidden waterfall in Oregon. Both forums were obscure, the kind accessed only by dedicated outdoor hobbyists. These similarities were too precise to dismiss. Investigators worked to uncover the motive behind this pattern. Nothing of financial value was taken from any victim, and there were no ransom demands, which ruled out monetary gain. The victims lived in different states and had no connection to each other, eliminating personal vendettas. This suggested a methodical predator, someone searching for specific types of individuals who enjoyed solitude, trusted fellow hikers, and valued nature over crowded places. The choice of remote trails seemed intentional. These were areas with few visitors, minimal surveillance, and long stretches without cell service. Anyone taken along such paths could vanish without witnesses, without noise, and without immediate search efforts. The killer appeared to understand outdoor environments well, choosing places that naturally erased evidence through weather, wildlife, and shifting terrain. Detectives formed a hypothesis. The perpetrator used online communities as hunting grounds. By blending in with real outdoor enthusiasts, they could identify individuals who enjoyed exploring isolated terrain. Once a target was chosen, the killer built trust through casual conversations, slowly guiding the victim toward a secluded location where control was easy and escape unlikely. The realization created a new urgency in the investigation. If this person had continued undetected for years, there was no telling how many victims existed beyond the three known cases. Investigators feared the disappearances could represent only a small portion of a much larger pattern. What puzzled detectives most was how the killer managed to avoid detection for so long. The anonymity of online forums played a major role, but the precision behind each disappearance suggested someone who studied digital security, outdoor survival, and methods for avoiding law enforcement. It became clear they were not dealing with a random individual acting on impulse. They were facing someone who carefully selected victims, meticulously planned each encounter, and erased every trace once the crime was committed. The more the team learned, the more they understood that Evan's disappearance was not an isolated event. It was part of a hidden chain stretching across states, a chain held together by one unknown individual whose careful planning had kept them invisible. No one realized it yet, but this carefully constructed operation was about to collapse because of a single error the killer never expected to make. Investigators now understood they were dealing with someone who operated with precision, patience, and a deep understanding of both the outdoors and digital anonymity. As they pieced together timelines and behaviors from each missing person case, a clearer picture of the killer's routine began to form. It was not chaotic or impulsive. It followed a deliberate and predictable structure, refined over years until it became almost impossible to detect. This individual did not choose victims carelessly. Instead, they selected people who were naturally drawn to isolation, hikers who preferred unmarked trails, campers who enjoyed extended solo trips, and outdoor enthusiasts who saw remote locations as opportunities rather than risks. Detectives mapped out the forums and online groups where each victim had interacted before disappearing. The killer always entered these communities quietly, posting just enough to appear authentic, but never revealing anything personal. Every message was strategic. They only reached out to potential targets after observing them for weeks, sometimes months. They studied patterns when the person logged in, what type of trails they liked, their comfort level with wilderness challenges, and their openness to meeting new hiking partners. This method allowed the killer to slip into conversations naturally, avoiding suspicion. The approach was always the same. The killer started with harmless comments about gear or weather, slowly building trust. Once the victim seemed comfortable, the killer introduced the idea of an unusual or secluded trail that wasn't popular but offered something exciting: better views, untouched landscapes, or hidden natural landmarks. The victims, enthusiastic and trusting, often saw this as an opportunity to explore something new with someone who seemed experienced. Detectives examined each digital conversation and discovered a repeating pattern that felt almost like a scripted routine. The killer never rushed the process. They allowed victims to initiate questions, creating the illusion of a mutual plan rather than a lure. They avoided using the same username twice. They never suggested trails that were too close to towns or areas with heavy foot traffic. Their communication was calm, polite, and knowledgeable, traits that lowered defenses and reinforced the idea that they were simply a seasoned hiker sharing their passion. Once the meetup was arranged, the killer chose precise timing. They preferred early mornings or late afternoons, when trails were less crowded. They selected locations that lacked cell service and had multiple branching paths, making it difficult for search teams to track direction. By the time a victim's family realized something was wrong, hours had often passed, giving the killer ample time to disappear without a trace. Law enforcement noticed something else. The killer never left physical evidence behind. No footprints, no discarded items, no signs of a struggle in the areas searched. It suggested expertise in navigating natural terrain, perhaps someone familiar with backcountry movement who understood how to mask their presence. They likely knew which surfaces preserved footprints and which did not, which areas had loose soil, and which locations offered an easy escape route. Another detail emerged. The killer always contacted victims from devices that could not be traced: temporary laptops, public networks, and rotating IP addresses. They never logged in from the same access point twice. This level of caution indicated someone who studied digital security, testing weaknesses and learning how to exploit systems without leaving identifiable traces. The investigators realized they were facing an opponent who operated like a shadow present long enough to lure, then erased from existence before anyone noticed. Everything from the first message to the final disappearance followed a pattern so carefully constructed that it seemed almost mechanical. The killer's routine was methodical, almost professional, shaped by experience and reinforced by the absence of mistakes. But what the investigators did not yet know was that even the most disciplined routine could falter, and it would be a minor digital slip, a moment of carelessness, that would crumble the entire operation the killer had spent years perfecting. Digital forensics teams continued digging through Evan's online records, searching for anything that might reveal the true identity behind the username Ridgewalker. They expected the investigation to end in another dead end. Just like the earlier attempts with the previous victims, the killer's online behavior had always been clean, leaving no IP addresses, no identifiable login patterns, and no metadata. But this time, something was different. Something the killer never intended to leave behind. For hours, forensic analysts examined message logs, temporary internet files, and data fragments automatically stored by the hiking forum's servers. Most of the information looked ordinary, the same type of material they had already combed through, but when they checked the server's archived activity, they found a single, unusual data entry linked to one of Ridgewalker's messages. It wasn't the message itself, but a deleted file attachment record that appeared only for a split second before being removed. The killer had attached a file, likely by accident, and then quickly deleted it. A normal user would have never noticed, but the forum's system had saved a temporary trace before the deletion. The file itself no longer existed, but the metadata remained. It contained a partial device identifier, a short string of characters that revealed just enough information about the laptop that had created the file. It wasn't a full serial number, and it didn't directly expose the owner's identity, but it was the first real clue investigators had ever found. With this small fragment, analysts compared the data against multiple device registries and public system logs. It took days of cross-referencing, running automated searches, and eliminating matches, but eventually the identifier pointed to a laptop model registered under the name of Marcus Halden. The moment his name surfaced, investigators shifted their attention immediately. Marcus Halden was a wilderness guide who lived just outside Silverbrook. Someone known for leading nature tours and teaching survival skills. His job gave him knowledge of remote trails, weather patterns, and wilderness behavior, expertise that aligned with everything detectives had theorized about the killer. More importantly, his employment allowed him to travel frequently across different states without creating suspicion, matching the timeline of the earlier disappearances. Marcus lived alone in a small cabin near the forest, a location that gave him privacy and immediate access to remote areas. When detectives pulled public records, they discovered he had moved several times over the years, each time settling near large forests or national parks. He had no criminal history, no complaints, and no known conflicts. His neighbors described him as polite but distant, someone who rarely spoke unless necessary. That quiet, unobtrusive lifestyle was exactly what had allowed him to operate unnoticed for so long. While investigators gathered more information, they discovered an even more troubling detail. Marcus had left town days after Evan's disappearance, claiming he was traveling for a wilderness training seminar. The timing felt too perfect to be a coincidence. Detectives believed he had already sensed the investigation tightening around him, and had chosen to step away temporarily. The digital mistake became the turning point. That single accidental attachment, just a momentary slip, exposed the identity he had spent years hiding. His carefully layered privacy settings, rotating usernames, and temporary devices had all worked flawlessly until that one error. Without it, investigators might have continued searching blindly for months, maybe years, while Marcus remained free to select new victims. The team realized they now had the break they needed. With a real name, they could obtain warrants, search his property, track his financial movements, and analyze his travel history. The killer's invisibility had finally fractured, and the routine he had perfected so meticulously had been undone by a single forgotten click. The mistake was small, almost insignificant, yet powerful enough to unravel his entire operation, setting the stage for a discovery far more disturbing than anyone expected. Investigators wasted no time once Marcus Halden's name emerged from the digital evidence. Within hours they secured warrants to search his home, his devices, and the large wooded properties surrounding his cabin. Even before stepping inside, the team felt a heaviness in the air. The location was isolated, positioned near a stretch of forest that connected miles of unmonitored trails. It was the perfect environment for someone who knew how to disappear and make others disappear as well. When investigators entered the cabin, they found a space that looked ordinary at first glance. The living room was simple, containing only a worn couch, a small table, and a few personal belongings. There were no photographs on the walls, no signs of family visits, no decorations to suggest sentimentality. It felt more like a temporary shelter than a home, as if Marcus had designed his life to leave behind as little trace as possible. But as detectives moved deeper into the cabin, the evidence became more revealing. In a back room, they discovered maps pinned across an entire wall. Each map highlighted different states: Colorado, Oregon, Wyoming, Washington, and several others. The markings on these maps were unsettling. Trails were circled in red ink, remote clearings were outlined, and certain points were connected by hand-drawn lines. Some areas were marked with dates, while others had coded numbers that investigators would later match to the times and locations of earlier disappearances. It was a full visual record of how Marcus had operated, stretching across years and multiple states. Next they found old camping permits and reservation forms, but the names used on them were fake. Different identities appeared repeatedly, all attached to Marcus's handwriting. Detectives realized he had been using these false identities to book campsites, rent equipment, and move unnoticed across regions. It became clear that his operation had not been spontaneous. It was structured, planned, and carried out with an almost mechanical level of discipline. In a drawer beneath the maps, investigators uncovered personal belongings that did not belong to Marcus. There were watches, bracelets, keychains, and other small items. None were valuable, but each one carried emotional significance, items people took with them on trips or kept as part of their daily routine. Detectives recognized some of these objects from the missing person reports. They now had physical confirmation linking Marcus to the victim. Outside the cabin, officers searched the surrounding property. Behind the house stood a weathered shed secured with a heavy lock. Once it was forced open, investigators found the most disturbing evidence yet. Inside there were storage bins filled with gear: tents, backpacks, water bottles, survival kits. Some items had initials written on them, which matched those of several missing hikers. The shed also contained journal pages, torn from notebooks belonging to different people. These pages recorded trip plans, schedules, and personal reflections, suggesting Marcus had taken them from his victims before their disappearances. Investigators realized the shed served as both a trophy room and an archive. Marcus had documented his actions carefully, recording routes, weather conditions, and the behavior of each victim. The precision of these notes reflected a person who saw his actions as a system rather than a crime. It was the clearest proof of how calculated he had been. What shocked investigators most was how ordinary Marcus had seemed to the outside world. He blended seamlessly into hiking communities, earning trust with knowledge and experience. No one suspected that behind his quiet demeanor was a methodical predator who had used nature itself as a weapon and a shield. With every piece of evidence collected, law enforcement understood the scale of Marcus's operation. It spread far beyond Silverbrook, far beyond Evan Mercer, and far beyond anything they expected to uncover. And yet, the entire structure, every hidden detail, every controlled step, had been undone because of one brief digital mistake, a single misplaced attachment that shattered the secrecy he depended on. The discovery of Marcus Halden's notebooks, maps, and stored belongings changed the direction of the investigation entirely. What began as a search for one missing college student had grown into a nationwide case involving multiple states and several unsolved disappearances. Investigators spent days cataloging every item found in his cabin and shed, piecing together a timeline that stretched back far longer than anyone expected. Each detail uncovered deepened the sense of urgency. Authorities needed to understand the full extent of his actions, identify all his victims, and ensure that no one else had fallen into the same trap. Forensic teams analyzed the journals first. They were filled with observations written in a cold, structured manner. Marcus had recorded details about weather patterns, remote trail conditions, and the behavior of individual hikers he encountered online. He noted what made them good targets: solitary habits, enthusiasm for exploring unknown areas, and trust in experienced hikers. His notes contained no emotion, no hesitation. Everything was approached like a calculated task, showing that he had viewed these disappearances not as random acts, but as a method he believed he had perfected. The incomplete sentence found in Evan's notebook finally made sense as investigators matched dates and messages. It became clear that Evan had begun to sense something was wrong before leaving for the meetup. Perhaps he realized the trail recommendation was suspicious, or the conversation with Ridge Walker had shifted in a way that made him uncomfortable. Whatever realization he had, he wrote it down too late. Marcus likely contacted him again before he could finish the thought. The unfinished message now stood as the silent evidence of Evan's final attempt to warn himself. As news of Marcus Halden's identification spread, communities across several states were shaken. Families who had spent years searching for answers suddenly found themselves pulled back into the spotlight. Investigators contacted each family with care, confirming where Marcus had been during specific time periods. Slowly, the scattered puzzle pieces formed a clearer picture. The isolated disappearances, once considered unrelated tragedies or unfortunate accidents, were now understood to be a pattern orchestrated by one individual who relied on distrust of coincidence to avoid suspicion. Meanwhile, teams tracked Marcus's movements through travel receipts, wilderness permits, and digital logs that were concealed beneath layers of false identities. Everything pointed to a structured routine that had allowed him to move freely without attracting attention. Yet all of these layers, every false name, every coded note, every concealed path, collapsed because of a single technological slip. The accidental file attachment exposed the device he used, which led directly to his name, his home, and his hiding place. Marcus was eventually located hundreds of miles away, staying in a rented cabin while planning another trip. He was taken into custody without incident, but investigators later learned he had been preparing to leave again within days. The timing confirmed their worst fear: another victim might have been chosen. The capture prevented further loss, but it also emphasized how narrow the margin had been. Without that tiny fragment of metadata, Marcus might have continued unnoticed, adding more names to the list of unsolved disappearances. When the full truth came to light, Silverbrook and the surrounding communities struggled to process the reality that one quiet, seemingly ordinary man had constructed a hidden world of manipulation and control. He had blended into nature, using its vastness as both cover and weapon. The case became a stark reminder of how small details, an unfinished sentence, a misplaced file, a trace of metadata can break open even the most carefully crafted deception. In the end, the downfall of Marcus Halden did not come from a major error or a dramatic confrontation. It came from the smallest mistake imaginable, a tiny digital footprint left behind for only a moment. Yet that moment was enough to expose everything he had spent years trying to hide. The system he built, the secrecy he trusted, and the confidence he relied upon all unraveled because of a single slip, proving that even the most meticulous predator cannot plan for every possibility.